We always thought Leonardo da Vinci was just about the Mona Lisa smile, the exquisite anatomical drawings in textbooks, or that gentle-eyed Renaissance genius with a long beard. But if you actually open his manuscripts, you will find things might be entirely different. This is a man who drew angels with his left hand and envisioned futuristic machinery with his right. He designed a prototype tank over 400 years before World War I. He conceptualized a submarine over 350 years before Captain Nemo in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He even drew a rapid-fire weapon with 33 barrels during an era when Europe was still largely stuck in the matchlock age. What is more surprising is that he seemed fully aware of what these designs meant. Next to an aircraft sketch, there is a hidden note written in mirror text. Written from right to left, it must be read with a mirror. The translation roughly says he would not publish these designs because certain aspects of human nature cannot be trusted. Perhaps what Da Vinci feared was not other people but the very things he drew. Out of about 7,000 surviving manuscript pages, nearly 2,000 relate to various mechanical devices. Some were 4 or 5 centuries ahead of his time, and some even 8 centuries ahead. Strangely, Da Vinci seemingly intended to hide these contents. He wrote most of his notes in mirror text, burned some manuscripts, and intentionally introduced errors into certain blueprints. This way, even if someone stole the designs, they could hardly build a functioning prototype. Centuries later, these manuscripts were discovered in the basements of Milanese castles, libraries in Madrid, and private collections of European nobles. One famous manuscript only resurfaced in the National Library of Spain in 1965. Before that, it had been misfiled for 400 years. Nobody knew what it truly was. And that is exactly the real question. How did a man born in the small town of Vinci in 1452, the son of a notary and a peasant woman, without a university education, without access to highly guarded archives of knowledge, and without any engineering mentors, come up with these ideas? Why could he propose concepts that humanity would not rediscover until the 19th and 20th centuries? Interestingly, in a 1482 letter to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, Da Vinci wrote that he had methods to breach any fortress unless it was built on solid rock. Notice his words. He said any fortress. Not many, not most, but any. Today we will look at 12 mysterious designs left by Da Vinci. For centuries, the church, the engineering community, the military, and many historians of science either ignored these designs or dismissed them as impractical fantasies. But the truth might not be that simple. Some of these designs have been reconstructed in the 21st century and operated successfully on their first test. Others remain impossible to fully replicate even today, and nobody can explain exactly how certain details were supposed to work. There is even a claim that the Swiss military reconstructed one of his inventions in a secret lab in 1994, and the test results were allegedly sealed until 2049. Whether these claims are true remains unconfirmed by public evidence. However, they undoubtedly make the mystery surrounding Da Vinci even more perplexing. In the Milan winter of 1485, the smell of burning locust wood filled the air. The temperature was around 7 degrees Celsius, and the ink had thickened from the cold. Da Vinci was 33 years old that year. The Duke of Milan gave him a special mission. It was not a painting, but a war machine that would shock enemies on sight. Da Vinci locked himself in his room for 4 straight days. When he emerged, a blueprint appeared on parchment that still astonishes military engineers today. It was a steel turtle. The design featured a circular wooden shell about 10 meters in diameter, covered in sloped armor made of oak and metal plates. Inside, 8 men would simultaneously turn cranks. The power transferred through gears to 4 outer wheels. The perimeter housed 36 light cannons capable of firing in all directions. It could advance, steer, and form a 360-degree defense. This was the prototype of the tank. At that time, it was still 431 years before the British first deployed the Mark I tank at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. The problem is that all this sounded almost impossible in 1485. There was no concept of composite armor or omnidirectional fire coverage back then. Cannons themselves were rare equipment used only in siege warfare. Yet Da Vinci had already drawn a self-propelled armored platform. Soon, doubts were raised. Some military engineers believed the genius artist might have underestimated real mechanical resistance. Based on the blueprints, the entire machine weighed nearly 8 tons. Relying solely on 8 people inside for power would theoretically make it very difficult to move. In 2010, commissioned by the BBC, British engineer Mark Rosell strictly followed Da Vinci's blueprints and used 15th-century materials to build a full-scale replica. Using oak, wrought iron, and bronze, everything was restored as closely to the original design as possible. However, once the test began, the 8 strong men cranked desperately, but the machine did not move a single millimeter. Engineers then opened the transmission system to inspect it and found a strange detail. As early as 1903, Italian historian Girolamo Calvi had already noticed this. The 2 main gears in the drawing were deliberately depicted in opposing directions. The front wheels turned forward, but the rear wheels turned backward. The result was that the entire machine could not move at all. This did not look like a design flaw, but rather an intentional error. It was as if someone sold you a bicycle, but deliberately installed critical parts backward before delivery. Only those who truly understood the design would know how to fix it. In a notebook preserved at the British Library, researchers found another intriguing statement from Da Vinci, saying that if someone were to build this exactly as designed, they would likely hurt themselves first. Da Vinci seemingly did not fully trust those in power or the future. Thus, this machine that could have changed the landscape of 16th-century Italian warfare ultimately remained just a drawing, sleeping for exactly 525 years. It was not until later, when British engineers simply swapped the positions of the 2 gears, that the 8-ton oak and iron machine finally rolled slowly across the British testing ground, exactly as Da Vinci had envisioned. And what happened next seemed almost equally unbelievable at the time. Monte Ceceri is located about 12 kilometers northeast of Florence, standing at an elevation of 414 meters. On an early morning in March 1505, a steady southwest wind blew across the ridge. A man stood on a rocky platform, strapped into a massive contraption. The machine had a wingspan of 11 meters, with a skeleton made of reeds and thin fir wood, making it as light as bird bones. The wing surfaces were covered with waxed silk and fine linen. The wings were connected to the main body via belts, pulleys, and connecting rods. The operator controlled the levers with his hands and placed his feet on pedals. When he pulled down the control levers and pushed with his feet simultaneously, the wings would execute a complex series of movements. They did not just flap up and down. One section would rotate and push the air backward like an oar, while the wingtips would flex and deform at the same time. This was an ornithopter, and absolutely not a toy. Da Vinci called it the Great Bird. In his Codex on the Flight of Birds, currently housed at the Royal Library of Turin, an intriguing sentence is left just before a few torn pages. It reads that the great bird will soon take its first flight, marked with the date March 24, 1505. The issue is that this is virtually impossible in theory. The machine itself weighed about 50 kilograms, plus an operator weighing around 70 kilograms, bringing the total weight to nearly 120 kilograms. Modern biomechanics tells us that lifting an ornithopter of this weight requires a power output of nearly 2 kilowatts, which is roughly 20 times the sustained power capacity of a normal human. Niccolò Machiavelli, who worked in Florence at the time and knew Da Vinci, commented in a private 1505 letter that the design looked spectacular, but it was hard to believe it could actually fly. This was practically the mainstream view during Da Vinci's life and the 400 years that followed. That was until people noticed the torn pages in the manuscript. After the entry about the great bird, a sudden gap appeared in the notes, and 3 whole pages were missing. Nobody knows who tore them out or when it happened. Even stranger is that on the very next page after the gap, Da Vinci's handwriting changed. The lines became unsteady, and the pen pressure was noticeably different. The very first sentence that follows is that regarding this matter, he will record no more, noting that his student is still alive and wishing his name not be mentioned. The phrase "still alive" is highly intriguing because it implies a severe accident might have occurred. In the archives of the Florentine Republic from the spring of 1505, there is indeed a brief record. It mentions an unexpected incident at Monte Ceceri, after which one of Da Vinci's apprentices lost the ability to stand and speak normally. The record is very brief, slipped among an account paying medical bills for a doctor. This medical expense was as high as 6 florins, equivalent to about 1,800 USD today, which was by no means a small amount at the time. In 1928, researchers found a private letter in the Melzi family archives. The writer was another student of Da Vinci named Hastily, dated 1517. A strange sentence appeared in the letter asking if the recipient remembered the time Lorenzo fell with the wings, adding that since then he could only move half of his mouth when speaking. Thus, a name finally surfaced. It was Lorenzo di Credi. This painter indeed worked in Da Vinci's studio, and after 1505, his artistic output suddenly plummeted. For a long time, art historians could not explain this blank period. Now it seems the answer might not be complicated. He was likely severely injured in that experiment, and could perhaps never paint as he used to. Imagine if you built a machine with your own hands, had your friend test it, and the machine lost control and crashed. Even though your friend survived, he was left with lifelong injuries. What would you write in your diary that night? Chances are you would write nothing at all, and it is more likely you would just tear that page out. Da Vinci tore out 3 whole pages. Ironically, later facts proved that this kind of ornithopter truly could not achieve real flight because human muscles simply cannot provide enough power. But right there in that same manuscript, turning back 20 pages, there is a completely different flying machine drawn. It has no flapping wings, only fixed aerodynamic surfaces, a long tail assembly, and movable structures for directional control. In other words, this is a glider. Its aerodynamic principles are almost identical to the glider the Wright brothers tested at Kitty Hawk in 1903, except Da Vinci was 398 years ahead of them. However, he never ended up building it. The answer might lie on the next page, but at that time, he simply had not found it yet. After 1505, Da Vinci never returned to aviation research, not even once. The man who looked up at the sky for over 30 years finally turned his back on it, shifting his gaze underground and underwater. In February 1500 in Venice, a thin layer of ice covered the edge of the lagoon, and the water temperature was around 6 degrees Celsius. To the east, near the entrance of the Dardanelles, the Ottoman fleet was assembling with 120 galleys anchored there. If they reached Venice, the Republic might not last a week. Doge Barbarigo urgently summoned the Council of Ten for a secret meeting at the Doge's palace. There was only one topic on the agenda, which was their last hope. An inventor from Florence had sent a letter claiming he could stop the Ottoman fleet from advancing without deploying a single ship. This inventor was 47 years old, and his name was Leonardo da Vinci. His proposed solution was an underwater stealth diver. On the back of page 909 of the Codex Atlanticus, this entire design is perfectly preserved. It featured a leather diving suit coated with fish oil for waterproofing, a sealed mask fitted with glass observation windows, and a breathing tube made of reeds extending all the way to the surface. This tube connected to a floating cork buoy that was virtually undetectable from a ship. The diver would carry a backup air bladder around the waist, wear webbed leather flippers on the feet, and be equipped with a drill saw and a dagger. The whole plan was not overly complicated. At night, the diver would depart from the Venetian port, walk along the seabed, and quietly approach the bottom of the Ottoman warships. He would drill holes in the hulls, install a special mechanical device, and then leave. The next day, when the warships headed into the open sea and began to accelerate, the water pressure would blow the devices open. The hulls would take on water, and the crew would not even know what happened. According to Da Vinci's vision, a single diver on one mission could neutralize several warships. The problem is that all of this was practically impossible, based on the scientific knowledge of the time. People in 1500 had not yet established modern fluid pressure theories. Boyle's law would not be proposed until 1662. If a person dived to a depth of 5 meters underwater and relied solely on a reed tube connected to the surface to breathe, their chest cavity would be subjected to immense water pressure, making it impossible to inhale normally. Da Vinci could not possibly explain this using modern physics, but he seemed to have discovered the issue through observation. And this is precisely the part of the blueprint that puzzles researchers the most. Attached to the diver's waist was an air bladder made of goat skin. It connected to the mask via a valve, allowing the diver to draw air from the bladder when needed. This mechanism is incredibly similar to modern scuba regulators, which were not made practical until Jacques Cousteau and others perfected them in 1943. Yet 443 years earlier, Da Vinci had already sketched the exact same concept on a leather air bladder. In 1500, Venetian nobleman Marco Antonio Sabellico wrote in his diary that Da Vinci presented an underwater breathing apparatus to the Council of Ten, but their excellencies considered it more of a fairy tale than a weapon. This is the most direct historical record known to date. Venice ultimately rejected the proposal, which is quite baffling. Why would a republic in desperate need of new technologies to survive a crisis abandon a design that could alter naval history? The answer was not discovered until 1939. Researchers found a private conversation record in the archives of the Venetian Inquisition. In the record, Senator Antonio Grimani asked da Vinci why he did not build the machine for Duke Sforza first if it truly worked, considering the Duke had more wealth and more enemies. Da Vinci's reply was just one sentence. He said it was because he did not wish to teach people how to do such things. Da Vinci even personally persuaded the Venetians not to use his invention. In the blank space next to the diving suit sketch, there remains a sentence in mirror writing. He wrote that nature gave humans the ability to fly, swim, and dig. And while he thanked nature, he would not share these abilities out of malice. Take a simple example. Suppose you invented a smartphone, but you knew that once it hit the market, half the population would stop talking to their families and forget to sleep. Consequently, you lock it in a drawer and give it to no one, because you have already foreseen the consequences it would bring. Da Vinci was exactly the same. He could imagine a scenario where fleets were sailing on the surface, while an invisible hand at the bottom of the sea dragged them into the abyss. Therefore, even though Venice was facing an imminent invasion, he still did not hand over the complete design. The Venice of 1500 ultimately survived without relying on any underwater weapons. And Da Vinci once again did what he spent his entire life doing. He invented, and then he buried it. The tank never truly rolled forward. The flying machine crashed. The diving gear remained trapped on paper and inside leather bladders. Until the next time, September 14th, 1495, at the square of the Sforza Castle in Milan. The midday temperature was about 22 degrees Celsius, with bright autumn sunlight. Around 40 people stood on the castle balcony. There were ambassadors, cardinals, and spies disguised as merchants. Sitting in the front row was the Venetian ambassador Ermolao Barbaro, alongside the secretary of King Charles IV of France. About 200 paces away from the viewing platform on the stone pavement sat a gun carriage. Mounted on it was a device no one had ever seen before. The fan-shaped frame arrayed 11 bronze gun barrels, with a second tier above it and a third tier above that. It was a three-tiered structure with 33 barrels in total. 2 artillerymen stood behind it. They turned a hand crank to rotate the lowest tier of barrels into the loading position. The middle tier was ready to fire, and the top tier was cooling down. One of the artillerymen raised a slow match and gently touched it to the powder. All 11 barrels fired simultaneously. Grape shot formed a fan-shaped net of fire, unloading in less than half a second. 20 seconds later, the second volley commenced. This was a machine gun. It was exactly 377 years before Richard Gatling patented the Gatling gun in 1862. And all this happened in 1495. A matchlock musketeer at the time could only fire once a minute, and firing 3 times continuously would cause the barrel to glow red or even crack. But the system Da Vinci designed solved the overheating problem through a 3-tier barrel rotation. It solved the loading problem through a revolving mechanism, and it solved the aiming problem through the spread of grape shot. The Milanese artillery commander Gian Giacomo Trivulzio, the very general who later defected to France and conquered Milan, wrote in his official post-demonstration report that Master Da Vinci's machine surpassed everything he had ever seen on the battlefield, stating that any single group of those barrels was worth an entire squad of musketeers. Trivulzio started fighting wars at age 15, and never praised others lightly, making this one of the few exceptions. More importantly, this time Da Vinci did not deliberately sabotage his own design. The blueprints in the Codex Atlanticus were flawless. There were no traps in the drawings, the gear directions were perfectly correct, and the barrel angle calculations were extremely precise. For the craftsmen of the time, as long as they had the blueprints, any blacksmith could build a functional prototype. But the real mystery of this story is something else entirely. Where did those machines go afterward? The demonstration absolutely happened, and envoys from various countries took the news back to their capitals. Da Vinci was even awarded an extra bonus of 50 ducats, which is equivalent to roughly 15,000 USD today. However, nothing happened after that. There were no combat records, no mass production logs, and no mention of this weapon entering the Milanese arsenal. In 1499, Milan was captured by King Louis XII of France. The French army entered the castle, took over the armory, and hauled away everything of value. Yet in the 1500 French royal inventory, there was absolutely no record of this multi-barrel weapon. In 1981, Italian military technology historian Vittorio Marchetti was browsing the Sforza family archives in a Parma library when he found a private letter Da Vinci wrote to the Duke's treasurer. The date was October 1495, exactly 1 month after the demonstration. In the letter, Da Vinci requested access to the armory, citing the need to check the casting precision of the barrels to begin mass production. The request was approved, but for the next 3 nights, Da Vinci stayed alone in the armory. On the 4th day, he submitted a report to the Duke, stating that micro-cracks had appeared in the bronze barrels during testing. The casting quality was subpar, and the machine was temporarily unfit for combat. Later researchers believe he actually destroyed those barrels with his own hands. He used a special hammer to strike the most fragile points on the barrels. Those spots naturally tended to form casting voids, and after his tampering, the damage was virtually undetectable to the naked eye. But once fired, the barrels would burst on the very first volley. The greatest irony is that the demonstration in the square was completely real. Envoys from multiple countries saw this weapon fire with their own eyes. Rumors of this mysterious machine quickly spread to Paris and Madrid. For the next 15 years, arsenals across Europe tried to replicate the weapon described in the diplomatic reports. But they all failed because nobody knew the true design details. The complete blueprints always remained in Da Vinci's hands. Let us put all these events together. The tank that could never move forward, the flying machine with 3 torn manuscript pages after the flight test, the apprentice who could only speak with half his mouth for life, the diving gear that predated modern scuba equipment by 443 years, and that perfectly designed multi-barrel gun destroyed in the dead of night by its own creator. 4 inventions all point to the exact same pattern. Da Vinci was perhaps not just a genius ahead of his time, but rather a man who actively hit the brakes. Whenever his creativity went too far and crossed his own moral bottom line, he would turn back and destroy his own achievements. It was not because he could not do it, but because he knew all too well what the world would become if these blueprints spread widely across Europe in the early 16th century. On May 2, 1519, Da Vinci passed away at the Château du Clos-Leuce in France. Legend has it that King Francis I of France was by his side. Vasari later recorded one of his final words. He said he had offended God and mankind because his work did not reach the height it should have. Did it really not reach that height? Perhaps in Da Vinci's eyes that was indeed the case. Or perhaps what he regretted was not those unfinished inventions, but rather the fact that he had ever drawn them in the first place. Or perhaps what he regretted was not those unfinished inventions, but rather the fact that he had ever drawn them in the first place. My dear friends, the story of Leonardo da Vinci leaves us with an invaluable lesson. In a world that constantly glorifies relentless progress and technological breakthroughs, Da Vinci reminds us of the profound power of restraint. True genius lies not only in what you have the ability to create, but also in having the wisdom to know when to stop. Intelligence gives us the power to invent, but it is our morality and compassion that dictate how we use that power. In today's era of artificial intelligence and rapid technological acceleration, perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from Da Vinci is the courage to hit the brakes for the sake of humanity's future. Everything we have just explored together represents my personal opinions and perspectives, carefully compiled and analyzed from various historical sources. There are bound to be aspects that are right or wrong, true or false, because history is always shrouded in unsolved mysteries. But what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on these contents? Was Da Vinci truly a silent guardian of humanity, or simply an inventor with flawed and unfinished designs? I really hope you can leave your thoughts down below so we can discuss and dissect this fascinating topic together. And before we wrap up today's video, I am incredibly curious to know where in the world you are watching this from right now. Please drop your city or country in the comments and let me know. It would be absolutely amazing to see how far our community reaches. Thank you so much for always watching and supporting TIAN Sex Universe. I cannot wait to read your thoughts. See you all in the comments section.